Have you ever wondered why our fascination with the devil never seems to fade? Why in our modern, enlightened age, Lucifer continues to captivate our imagination more than ever before? The answer might shock you to your core. What if everything you've been taught about Satan was deliberately designed to hide a much deeper truth? A truth so profound it could shake the foundations of what we believe about good and evil. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But somewhere in that vast cosmic drama, Lucifer, once the brightest of angels, fell from grace. Or did he? Today, we're diving into how 21st century literature has completely transformed our understanding of this ancient figure, turning traditional religious narratives upside down and challenging everything we thought we knew about the nature of evil itself. Whether you're a devoted believer or a curious skeptic, I promise you'll never look at Lucifer the same way again. This isn't just about fiction. It's about how our changing relationship with this character reflects profound shifts in our society's moral compass. So stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal might be the most controversial re-examination of biblical history you've ever encountered. Baruch haba. Welcome to a journey that will challenge your faith, expand your mind, and perhaps even transform your soul. For thousands of years, Lucifer has been portrayed as the ultimate embodiment of evil. The name itself, derived from Latin meaning light, bearer or morning star, carries a tragic irony. Once God's most beautiful angel, his pride led to his downfall. As Isaiah 14:2 tells us, "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations." This narrative has dominated Western consciousness for centuries. In medieval art, literature, and theology, Satan was depicted as a grotesque, horned beast, a tempter of souls, and the ruler of hell. Dante's Inferno placed him at the center of the ninth circle, eternally consuming sinners. Milton's Paradise Lost, while giving Lucifer eloquence and complexity, still framed him as God's adversary, famously declaring, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." But here's what's truly fascinating. The Bible itself contains remarkably few direct references to Lucifer as we understand him today. The comprehensive Satan we know is largely a medieval construction built from fragments across different texts and traditions. In fact, in the original Hebrew texts, a Satan often simply meant the adversary or the accuser, a role, not necessarily a specific being. The book of Job presents Satan not as God's enemy, but as something closer to a prosecuting attorney in God's court. Yea, or let there be light. The light of understanding often reveals that our most cherished beliefs have evolved dramatically over time. Consider this. What if our understanding of Lucifer says more about our own fears and moral boundaries than about any actual spiritual entity? What if the devil we've created is simply the shadow we cast when we stand in our own light? This traditional image, the horned tempter, the prince of darkness, served a clear social purpose. It created a repository for evil, a way to externalize the darkness within human nature. But in our complex modern world, such simple divisions between good and evil no longer satisfy our understanding of morality. And that's where 21st century fiction steps in, completely reimagining this ancient figure in ways that would have been considered blasphemous just generations ago. The transformation we're witnessing isn't just literary innovation, it's a profound cultural shift that reflects our changing relationship with authority, morality, and even God himself. And as we'll see, this new Lucifer might be more biblical than you think. In 21st century fiction, Lucifer has undergone a remarkable transformation. No longer the one-dimensional villain of traditional religious narratives, he has emerged as something far more intriguing, a complex antihero with depth, motivation, and inner conflict. This shift represents one of the most fascinating evolutions in modern storytelling. Take Neil Gaiman's portrayal in the Sandman series and its spin-offs. Here, Lucifer Morningstar isn't simply evil, he's existentially wary, philosophically complex, and ultimately seeking freedom from his predetermined role. When he abandons hell, handing the key to dream, it's not an act of malice but one of self-determination. Why do they blame me for all their little failings? This Lucifer asks. They use my name as if I spent my entire day sitting on their shoulders, forcing them to commit acts they would otherwise find repulsive. This question cuts to the heart of our modern moral uncertainty, in a world where we increasingly recognize the complexity of human psychology. The simplistic attribution of evil to external forces feels inadequate. As Proverbs 21:2 reminds us, a person may think their own ways are right, but the Lord weighs the heart. The weighing of hearts is rarely straightforward. In Mike Carey's Lucifer series, the character declares, "I have never understood the human need to soften the universe." This Lucifer refuses to be a convenient scapegoat for humanity's darkest impulses. Instead, he champions free will, ironically, the very gift God bestowed upon humanity. Ma Gadol Adonai, how great is the Lord, whose creation contains such complexity. What makes these portrayals so compelling for mature audiences is how they mirror our own internal struggles. We all contain contradictions. We all wrestle with our nature. As Romans 7:15 acknowledges, "I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do I do not do, but what I hate I do." In this light, Lucifer becomes not just a theological figure, but a psychological one, the part of ourselves that questions, rebels, and seeks autonomy. The controversy here is obvious. By humanizing the devil, are these works undermining traditional moral frameworks? Or are they actually inviting a more sophisticated moral engagement? After all, it's easier to reject a cartoon villain than to confront a character whose motivations we might partially understand or even share. What's truly revolutionary about this new Lucifer is that he forces us to question not just the nature of evil, but the nature of choice itself. If Lucifer chose rebellion, what does that tell us about our own moral agency? And if God created him knowing he would fall, what does that tell us about divine responsibility? These questions aren't just literary, they're profoundly theological. And they're exactly the kind of spiritual wrestling that builds a mature faith. As we continue to explore this evolution, ask yourself, does this complex Lucifer threaten your beliefs? Or does he invite you to examine them more deeply? Perhaps the most radical reimagining of Lucifer in contemporary fiction is the introduction of genuine emotional depth. Today's fictional devil loves, suffers doubts, and yearns experiences that make him startlingly relatable. This humanization creates a profound theological paradox. Can we empathize with the embodiment of evil without compromising our moral compass? In the television adaptation Lucifer, based on the character from Gaiman's universe, we see a fallen angel struggling with father issues, forming meaningful relationships, and even seeking therapy. Dad has a plan, this Lucifer sarcastically remarks, reflecting the wounded child still seeking approval from a distant father. The parallel to our own spiritual struggles is unmistakable. How many believers have felt abandoned or confused by God's apparent silence? As Psalm 221 cries out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" This emotional vulnerability transforms Lucifer from a theological concept into a mirror for our own spiritual wounds. Ani lo meven, I don't understand, becomes not just Lucifer's lament, but humanity's eternal question in the face of suffering and divine mystery. In Glenn Duncan's Eye, Lucifer, the fallen angel, is granted a month in a human body as a chance at redemption. The result is a darkly comic exploration of sensory experience, moral confusion, and existential dread. This Lucifer revels in human pleasures while simultaneously being overwhelmed by human pain. Funny how things make sense when you're dead, the character observes, highlighting how embodiment changes perspective, a theme with profound biblical resonance. After all, isn't the incarnation, God becoming flesh in Jesus, the ultimate statement about the importance of experiencing life from within a human body? John 1:14 tells us the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. In these modern tales, Lucifer undergoes a dark parallel to this incarnation, experiencing the full range of human sensation and emotion. What makes these portrayals so powerful for mature audiences is how they connect to universal experiences of alienation, longing, and the search for meaning. When Lucifer questions his purpose or feels abandoned by his creator, he becomes a surrogate for our own spiritual questioning. Some critics argue this humanization dangerously blurs moral boundaries. If Satan can love, if he can suffer, if he can seek redemption, what separates him from us? What becomes of evil as a concept? But perhaps this blurring is precisely the point. Matthew 7:3 asks, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye?" These humanized portrayals of Lucifer force us to confront the capacity for both good and evil that exists within each human heart. The question becomes not whether we can relate to the devil, but whether acknowledging our own capacity for rebellion brings us closer to or further from divine grace. Lo tov hiaut hadam levido. It is not good for man to be alone, even in our moral struggles. One of the most provocative aspects of Lucifer's modern literary transformation is his elevation as a symbol of justified rebellion against tyranny and dogma. This reimagining casts him not as a villain, but as a revolutionary fighting against divine dictatorship, a framing that resonates powerfully in our age of institutional distrust and individual empowerment. Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials trilogy, though not featuring Lucifer directly, draws heavily on Paradise, lost to frame its cosmic rebellion. The series portrays the authority of God as a decrepit, tyrannical figure, and celebrates those who fight against religious oppression. When Lord Asriel declares his intention to wage war on heaven, the narrative positions this as heroic rather than blasphemous. This perspective finds surprising biblical parallels. Consider how the prophets consistently challenged corrupt religious authorities. Amos 5:21-24 has God himself declaring, I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Is there not something of this prophetic tradition in these modern, rebellious Lucifers who challenge religious hypocrisy? In Glenn Duncan's eye, Lucifer, the fallen angel, presents his rebellion as a principled stand against divine totalitarianism. Eternity in the company of Almighty God is seen as a brilliant thing. I ask you, is it? You guys don't know him like I do. This framing invites readers to question whether blind obedience is truly a virtue, or whether moral autonomy requires questioning authority, even divine authority. Lo Tira, do not fear, takes on new meaning when applied to the courage needed to question received wisdom and religious dogma. For mature believers who have witnessed religious institutions fail or abuse power, these rebellious Lucifers can represent an uncomfortable truth: that sometimes standing against corrupt authority is the truly righteous path. The television series Supernatural plays with this theme extensively, portraying Lucifer as rebelling against a God who abandoned his creation. You think you know power? This Lucifer asks. I was the second thing God created after light. The implication is clear. His rebellion stems not from evil, but from intimate knowledge of God's flaws. This framing creates profound theological questions. If Lucifer rebelled against God, was it simply pride, as tradition holds, or was there legitimate grievance? Genesis tells us God looked upon creation and saw that it was good. But what if some aspects of the divine plan are questionable from a moral perspective? What if Lucifer's fall was not a cautionary tale about pride, but about the cost of moral courage? For many traditional believers, this reframing borders on blasphemy. Yet Revelation 3:16 warns against lukewarm faith. So, because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. Perhaps these challenging narratives serve to heat our faith, forcing us to engage more deeply with our beliefs rather than accepting them passively. What if the true test of faith isn't blind acceptance, but thoughtful wrestling, like Jacob grappling with the angel until receiving a blessing? These rebellious Lucifers invite us into that struggle, challenging us to examine whether we worship God out of love or fear, choice or compulsion. Can you handle this challenge to traditional interpretations? Or does the very idea of Lucifer as a justified rebel make you uncomfortable? That discomfort might be exactly where spiritual growth begins. Perhaps the most theologically challenging aspect of modern Lucifer narratives is how they reframe his fall not as cosmic rebellion, but as a necessary sacrifice within God's plan. This perspective transforms Lucifer from villain to victim, or even hidden hero, in the divine drama. In Neil Gaiman's murder mysteries, the first murder in creation occurs among the angels designing the universe. The investigating angel eventually realizes that Lucifer's fall was predetermined, a necessary component of creation itself. He made you to be the adversary, the angel of the bottomless pit. One character tells Lucifer, "It's your job." This concept finds surprising resonance in Scripture. In Job 1:6-12, Satan appears in God's court and acts with God's explicit permission. In Revelation, the dragon is bound for 1,000 years, then must be released for a time. These passages suggest Satan serves a function within divine order rather than standing completely outside it. Any mammon, I believe, but what exactly are we believing in when we contemplate Lucifer's role? If God is truly omniscient and omnipotent, could Lucifer's rebellion truly have been a surprise? Or was it, in some mysterious way, part of the plan? In the television series Lucifer, the protagonist gradually realizes his rebellion and punishment were orchestrated by his father for specific purposes. "Dear old Dad," he bitterly remarks, always playing games with his creatures. This framing raises profound questions about divine justice and free will. If Lucifer was created to fall, can he truly be blamed for fulfilling his purpose? This perspective connects to ancient theological debates about predestination and free will. Romans 9:20-21 asks, "Does not the potter have the right to make out of the same lump of clay some pottery for special purposes and some for common use?" If God created Lucifer knowing he would fall, what does this tell us about divine responsibility? Some Gnostic texts, like those found at Nag Hammadi, suggest that the true God is beyond the creator deity who is portrayed as flawed or even malevolent. While Orthodox Christianity rejects this view, these ancient alternative perspectives show that questions about God's justice and Lucifer's fall have existed since Christianity's earliest days. For mature believers, these narratives offer a challenging spiritual exercise. They invite us to consider whether our conception of God is big enough to encompass apparent contradictions. Can we worship a God who might have created evil for a purpose beyond our understanding? Isaiah 55:8-9 reminds us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." The most provocative modern portrayals suggest Lucifer's rebellion was actually an act of cosmic self-sacrifice, taking on the role of adversary because creation required opposition to function. This transforms the traditional narrative from a simple morality tale about pride to a complex meditation on necessary suffering and hidden purpose. What if Lucifer's greatest sin wasn't pride, but actually revealing too much truth? What if, like the serpent in Eden offering knowledge, his real transgression was pulling back the curtain on divine mysteries humans weren't meant to comprehend? Can you accept a God whose plans might include deliberate creation of opposition? Or does this view threaten the very foundation of traditional morality? The answer might reveal more about your own theology than you realize. One of the most psychologically profound aspects of modern Lucifer narratives is how they position him not as an external tempter, but as a mirror reflecting humanity's own darkness. This shift transforms him from theological adversary to psychological archetype, the shadow self we all contain, but often deny. In the television adaptation of Neil Gaiman's Lucifer, the titular character possesses the ability to draw out people's deepest desires. "Tell me," he asks his subjects, "what is it you truly desire?" The answers reveal not external temptation, but internal longing, desires already present within each person. This portrayal aligns surprisingly well with James 1:14. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. This Lucifer doesn't create sin. He merely reveals what already exists within the human heart. Menorah Hamakam Hayes, how awesome is this place where we confront our own hidden nature? Glenn Duncan's eye. Lucifer offers this provocative observation. The devil doesn't make you do anything. He just shows you how much fun it would be. This framing shifts moral responsibility entirely to human choice, with Lucifer serving merely as illuminator of possibilities already available. For mature audiences who have lived long enough to recognize their own capacity for both good and evil, this psychological framing resonates deeply. It connects to Carl Jung's concept of the shadow, the disowned aspects of self that, when unacknowledged, can control us from the unconscious. In Mike Carey's Lucifer comics, the fallen angel states, "They talk of me going around buying souls, like a fishwife at market. But every soul is already bought and paid for." That's the whole point. This perspective suggests that humanity's fallen state isn't Lucifer's doing, but our own inherent condition, a view that aligns with the doctrine of original sin. Romans 3:23 tells us all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. If this is true, then perhaps Lucifer's greatest power isn't temptation, but simply holding up a mirror to what already exists within us. The serpent in Eden didn't force the fruit upon Eve. He merely suggested possibilities and let human choice do the rest. Some of the most thought-provoking modern portrayals suggest that Lucifer's true punishment isn't ruling hell, but having to witness the depths of human depravity. In these narratives, he doesn't torture souls. He simply creates a space where humans torture themselves with their own guilt and regret. This psychological framing creates a profound spiritual challenge. If Lucifer is merely reflecting our own capacity for evil rather than imposing it from without, what becomes of our tendency to externalize blame? Matthew 7:3-5 commands, "You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." By portraying Lucifer as mirror rather than tempter, these narratives invite us to take full responsibility for our moral choices rather than attributing our failings to external influence. They challenge us to acknowledge the darkness within rather than projecting it onto convenient theological scapegoats. What if the most spiritually mature response to evil isn't to blame Satan, but to recognize our own capacity for darkness? What if true spiritual growth begins not with denying the devil his due, but with claiming full responsibility for our own moral agency? Hasatan, the adversary, may be less an external entity than the adversarial aspect of our own nature that we must acknowledge to truly overcome. Perhaps the most theologically revolutionary aspect of modern Lucifer narratives is their exploration of potential redemption for the fallen angel. This concept challenges the traditional view of eternal damnation and raises profound questions about the limits of divine mercy and the possibility of universal salvation. In the television series Supernatural, Lucifer is portrayed as a tragic figure who believes God abandoned him. "You know why God cast me down?" this Lucifer asks. "Because I loved him more than anything. And then God created you, the little, hairless apes, and then he asked all of us to bow down before you, to love you more than him. And I said, Father, I can't. I said, these human beings are flawed, murderous, and for that God had Michael cast me into hell." This portrayal frames Lucifer's sin as misguided love rather than pure rebellion, opening the possibility for reconciliation. It connects surprisingly well with the prodigal son parable in Luke 15, suggesting that even the most distant child might eventually return to the Father's embrace. Teshuvah, repentance or return, is a central concept in Jewish theology, suggesting that no one is beyond redemption if they truly turn back to God. Could this apply even to Lucifer? Ezekiel 33:11 has God declaring, "I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that they turn from their ways and live." In Neil Gaiman's Sandman universe, Lucifer eventually abandons hell, seeking to escape his predetermined role. In some interpretations, this represents a form of redemption, not through conventional repentance, but through refusing to continue playing the cosmic villain. For mature believers who have experienced their own moral failures and redemption, these narratives offer a profound spiritual question. If God's mercy extends to us despite our sins, could it ultimately extend even to the archetypal sinner? Romans 5:20 tells us, "Where sin increased, grace increased all the more." Is there any limit to this principle? The concept of apokatastasis, universal restoration, appears in early Christian thought, most notably in Origen's writings, suggesting that all beings, even demons, might eventually be reconciled to God. While this view was later rejected by mainstream Christianity, it represents an ancient strand of hope for universal redemption. In Anne Rice's Memnich the Devil, Lucifer claims to be not God's adversary but his servant, punishing the wicked as a necessary but misunderstood role. He seeks not to overthrow God, but to be understood and eventually reconciled. This portrayal connects to the concept of the harrowing of hell, Christ's descent to the underworld between crucifixion and resurrection, traditionally understood as liberating righteous souls, but potentially offering redemption even to fallen angels. The theological implications are staggering. If Lucifer himself could be redeemed, what becomes of our understanding of eternal punishment? If the architect of cosmic rebellion can return to grace, is anyone truly beyond salvation? Colossians 1:20 speaks of God's plan to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood, shed on the cross. Could all things truly mean all? Some will find these redemption narratives deeply troubling, undermining the seriousness of sin and the justice of divine punishment. Others will see them as the ultimate expression of grace, that even the original rebel might eventually be welcomed home. What if Lucifer's ultimate purpose in the divine plan is not to remain eternally separated, but to demonstrate that no distance from God is too great to be bridged by love? What if the final chapter of cosmic history includes not the destruction of evil, but its transformation? Loyisa goy el goy cherev nation shall not lift up sword against nation. Perhaps even the most fundamental cosmic conflict might eventually find resolution in divine love. The sympathetic portrayal of Lucifer in contemporary fiction creates a profound ethical dilemma for audiences, particularly those with traditional religious beliefs. If we find ourselves empathizing with the devil, what does this reveal about our own moral compass? Are these portrayals dangerous subversions of traditional values, or do they invite a more nuanced ethical engagement? In the television series Lucifer, the protagonist repeatedly insists, "I'm not evil, I punish evil." This framing positions him not as the source of sin, but as its consequence, an agent of justice rather than corruption. When viewers find themselves rooting for this character, are they embracing evil or recognizing the complexity of moral judgment? Mishpat Tzedek, righteous judgment, requires discernment beyond simple categories. As Jesus challenged in John 8:2-7, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone." These sympathetic Lucifer narratives often force us to examine our own moral failings before condemning others. Critics argue these portrayals dangerously normalize evil by making it attractive and understandable. When Paradise Lost was published, William Blake famously observed that Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it because he made Satan such a compelling character. Modern portrayals go much further, explicitly inviting sympathy for the fallen angel. Yet there's theological precedent for seeing complexity even in cosmic evil. Ezekiel 28:1-19, often interpreted as referring to Satan's fall, begins by acknowledging his original perfection. "You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God." This passage recognizes the tragedy of potential corrupted, not just the evil of the outcome. For mature believers who have experienced moral complexity in their own lives, these sympathetic portrayals may actually deepen rather than undermine ethical thinking. They challenge us to move beyond simplistic moral categories toward a more nuanced understanding of good and evil, one that acknowledges the potential for both in every heart. In Mike Carey's Lucifer comics, the fallen angel observes, "They think of me as a villain, which I find tiresome. I'm not the torturer. I'm merely the one who provides the means and the location." This perspective invites us to question whether facilitating evil is the same as committing it, a moral distinction with profound implications for our own complicity in systemic injustice. Al Taden et Chavercha ad Shatagia Limkomo. Do not judge your fellow until you have reached his place. This ancient wisdom suggests true moral judgment requires understanding context and motivation, not just actions. When modern narratives provide Lucifer's perspective, they're not necessarily justifying evil, but inviting this deeper moral engagement. The Book of Job presents Satan as operating with God's permission within a divine framework. This biblical complexity suggests that even within Scripture, the adversary's role isn't simply to oppose God, but to serve a function within God's larger purposes. Modern sympathetic portrayals often explore this nuance, suggesting Lucifer may be fulfilling a necessary cosmic role, rather than simply embodying evil. For viewers and readers raised in traditional faith, these portrayals create a productive spiritual tension. They force us to examine whether our moral frameworks are based on thoughtful engagement or simple categorization. Matthew 3:27 has Jesus condemning religious leaders as whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. Perhaps sympathetic Lucifer narratives serve as a check against religious hypocrisy, reminding us that claiming righteousness isn't the same as embodying it. What if these sympathetic portrayals aren't undermining morality, but actually strengthening it by forcing us beyond simplistic categories? What if true moral maturity requires acknowledging the complexity of evil rather than simply condemning it from a distance? The most challenging question these narratives raise isn't whether we should sympathize with Lucifer, but whether our traditional understanding of good and evil has been too limited all along. As Isaiah 55:8 reminds us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways," declares the Lord. Perhaps our human categories of villain and hero never fully captured the cosmic complexity these modern narratives strive to explore. The dramatic transformation of Lucifer in 21st century fiction isn't occurring in a vacuum. This reimagining reflects profound shifts in our cultural, religious, and philosophical landscape. Understanding why these portrayals resonate now offers insight into our changing relationship with authority, morality, and meaning itself. We live in an age of institutional distrust. From government scandals to religious abuse revelations, traditional authorities have repeatedly betrayed public confidence. Is it any wonder, then, that narratives featuring a Lucifer who questions divine authority find such receptive audiences? When the fallen angel in Supernatural asks, "You really think God is still watching over you?" he echoes the doubt many feel in an apparently godless world. Emet Miretz Titzmuk, truth springs from the earth. Perhaps these reimagined Lucifers represent an attempt to find truth from below, rather than accepting it from above, reflecting our cultural moment's crisis of authority. The rise of moral complexity in our storytelling parallels our increasingly nuanced understanding of psychology and human behavior. We now recognize that people rarely act from pure evil, but from complex motivations, including trauma, misunderstanding, and distorted good intentions. Modern Lucifer narratives apply this psychological sophistication to the ultimate villain, transforming him from cartoon evil to complex person. In Neil Gaiman's Lucifer narratives, the fallen angel states, "They call me the Lord of Lies." Never let it be said that I don't have a sense of irony. This self-awareness reflects our postmodern understanding that truth itself is often contextual and perspective-dependent rather than absolute. For mature believers navigating a pluralistic world, these complex portrayals may actually provide a more sophisticated framework for faith than traditional black and white morality tales. They invite engagement with doubt, complexity, and moral ambiguity experiences central to adult spiritual life. As 1 Corinthians 13:3 tells us, "When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me." The information age has democratized knowledge previously controlled by religious authorities. Ancient texts like the Nag Hammadi Library or the Dead Sea Scrolls are now widely available, revealing early Christian diversity and competing narratives about cosmic order. Modern Lucifer portrayals often draw on these alternative traditions, suggesting our contemporary reimagining has ancient roots. Perhaps most significantly, these sympathetic devil narratives reflect our culture's increasing emphasis on questioning received wisdom and hearing from marginalized voices. If history is written by the winners, these stories ask, what might cosmic history look like from the perspective of the ultimate loser? This approach connects to liberation theology's emphasis on God's preferential option for the oppressed and marginalized. What if these reimagined Lucifers aren't signs of moral decay, but of moral evolution, an attempt to develop more nuanced ethical frameworks suitable for our complex global society? What if they represent not a rejection of divine truth, but a more sophisticated engagement with it? My idea, who knows whether these cultural shifts are leading us towards spiritual confusion or deeper understanding. But the questions these narratives raise cannot be dismissed simply as blasphemy. They reflect genuine spiritual wrestling in a world where traditional answers often seem inadequate to contemporary challenges. The sympathetic portrayal of Lucifer in modern fiction inevitably raises profound theological questions about divine justice, free will, and the nature of evil itself. These narratives don't merely entertain, they challenge fundamental religious concepts that have shaped Western civilization for millennia. Traditional theology presents God as perfectly just, with Lucifer's eternal punishment as the righteous consequence of cosmic rebellion. But modern portrayals question whether eternal punishment for a single act of rebellion truly reflects justice, or rather suggests divine vengeance. As the Lucifer character in the eponymous TV series asks, "Why do you blame me for all their little failings?" As if I'd spent my days sitting on their shoulders, forcing them to commit acts they'd otherwise find repulsive. This question connects to ancient theological debates about predestination and free will. If God created Lucifer knowing he would fall, can Lucifer be fully blamed for fulfilling his predetermined nature? Romans 9:20-21 acknowledges this tension. But who are you, a human being, to talk back to God? Shall what is formed say to the one who formed it, "Why did you make me like this?" Does not the potter have the right to make out of the same lump of clay some pottery for special purposes, and some for common use? Dynamet, true judgment requires proportionality. Yet traditional views suggest Lucifer receives infinite punishment for finite sin. Modern portrayals often highlight this apparent injustice, asking whether a truly loving God could maintain eternal torment for any being, even Satan himself. In Neil Gaiman's Sandman universe, Lucifer eventually abandons hell, declaring, "I've quit, I've resigned, I'm retiring." This narrative suggests that even cosmic roles aren't necessarily eternal, that change and evolution might be possible even for the most fixed theological figures. For mature believers who have witnessed injustice in human institutions, these questions about divine justice aren't merely academic. They connect to lived experience of systems that punish disproportionately or without rehabilitation. Ezekiel 18:2-23 has God asking, "Do I take any pleasure in the death of the wicked?" declares the sovereign Lord D. "Rather, am I not pleased when they turn from their ways and live?" This passage suggests divine justice aims at restoration, not merely punishment. Some of the most theologically challenging modern portrayals suggest Lucifer's rebellion might have been justified, a response to divine tyranny, rather than mere pride. This framing connects to liberation theology's emphasis on righteous resistance to oppressive power. While traditional believers might find this perspective blasphemous, it raises important questions about whether obedience is always virtuous, especially to power that appears unjust. The concept of universal reconciliation, that all beings, even demons, might eventually be restored to divine harmony, appears in some early Christian writings, particularly those of Origen. While later declared heretical, this view suggests that even within early Christianity, there were those who couldn't reconcile eternal punishment with divine love. Modern sympathetic Lucifer narratives often explore this possibility of ultimate redemption. What if our traditional understanding of divine justice has been too limited by human concepts of retribution? What if God's ultimate plan includes not the eternal punishment of the wicked, but their transformation and restoration? Colossians 1:19-20 suggests this cosmic scope, "For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross." Love ultimately extend even to the cosmic adversary? And if not, is it truly unlimited love? These questions don't necessarily undermine faith. They may actually deepen it by forcing us beyond simplistic theology toward more mature spiritual understanding. As Isaiah 1:18 invite us, "Come now, let us reason together," says Theology. Perhaps these challenging narratives are invitations to this divine reasoning, not threats to it. One of the most fascinating aspects of modern Lucifer portrayals is the return to the original meaning of his name, Lucifer, the light bearer. These narratives often reframe him not primarily as a tempter, but as an illuminator who brings forbidden knowledge, uncomfortable truth, and spiritual awakening. In Milton's Paradise Lost, Satan declares the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. Modern interpretations expand this concept, suggesting Lucifer's true power isn't corruption, but illumination, revealing truths others wish to keep hidden. Or Laolam, light eternal, takes on ironic meaning when associated with the fallen angel, whose name itself means bearer of light. This portrayal connects surprisingly well with the serpent in Eden, who promises Eve that eating the forbidden fruit will open her eyes to knowledge of good and evil. Genesis 3:25 has the serpent promising, "For God knows that when you eat from it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." While traditionally interpreted as deception, modern narratives often reframe this as truth, telling Lucifer offering knowledge, divine authority, wish to withhold. In the television series Lucifer, the protagonist possesses the ability to draw out people's deepest desires, bringing hidden truths to light. "Tell me," he repeatedly asks, "what is it you truly desire?" This portrayal suggests Lucifer's function isn't to corrupt, but to reveal, forcing confrontation with truths we hide, even from ourselves. For mature believers who have experienced how uncomfortable truths can disrupt religious complacency, this illuminating Lucifer offers a provocative spiritual metaphor. Jesus himself declared in John 8:32, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." What if Lucifer, paradoxically, serves this truth-telling function, challenging comfortable religious narratives that avoid difficult questions? The Gnostic traditions found in texts like those discovered at Nag Hammadi often reframed the serpent in Eden as a wisdom bringer, helping humans escape the control of a lesser creator deity. While Orthodox Christianity rejected these interpretations, they represent an ancient strand of thought that questioned whether knowledge itself could truly be evil, or whether its suppression served power rather than truth. In Anne Rice's Memnoch the Devil, Lucifer claims to be not God's enemy, but his critic challenging divine governance out of love for creation, rather than hatred of its creator. This portrayal connects to the prophetic tradition within Scripture itself, where figures like Jeremiah or Amos harshly criticized religious and political authorities, while claiming to speak for true divine justice. The most theologically challenging modern portrayals suggest Lucifer's true sin wasn't pride, but excessive clarity, seeing through divine mysteries that humans were meant to accept on faith. What if the light he bears is too bright for comfortable religion, revealing complexities and contradictions that simpler faith narratives cannot contain? This illuminating Lucifer raises profound questions about authority and knowledge. Is faith stronger when it forbids certain questions or when it engages them directly? Is divine authority enhanced or diminished by critical examination? Proverbs 25:2 suggests, "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search out a matter is the glory of kings." Perhaps the searching itself has spiritual value, even when it leads to uncomfortable places. What if Lucifer's ultimate cosmic function isn't to oppose God, but to challenge believers to deeper understanding? What if the light he bears isn't meant to lead away from divine truth, but through complexity toward more mature comprehension of it? Or Kadash Altain Ter, may you shine a new light on Zion. Perhaps even the adversary, paradoxically, serves this illuminating function in the cosmic drama. The reimagining of Lucifer extends far beyond literature into television, film, music, and visual arts, creating a pervasive cultural shift in how we perceive this ancient figure. This mainstream popularization has brought theological questions once reserved for seminary classrooms into living rooms worldwide. The television series Lucifer, running for 6 seasons, transformed the fallen angel into a charming nightclub owner helping solve crimes in Los Angeles. With viewership in the millions, this portrayal reached audiences far beyond traditional religious contexts. When the protagonist declares, "I'm not evil, I punish evil," he introduces theological nuance to viewers who might never engage with religious texts directly. This popularization creates both opportunity and concern. Critics worry these entertaining portrayals trivialize profound spiritual concepts, reducing cosmic evil to mere personality quirks. Yet these accessible narratives also democratize theological questioning, inviting people who might feel alienated from formal religion to engage with spiritual concepts through popular media. Kol helam kulo jesher, sarmiad, the whole world is a very narrow bridge. Perhaps these popular portrayals serve as bridges between ancient religious concepts and contemporary spiritual seeking. Music has long engaged with Lucifer imagery. From blues legends like Robert Johnson to modern artists across genres. The Rolling Stones' sympathy for the devil introduced many to the concept of Satan as a complex historical witness rather than simple villain. When Mick Jagger sings, "Please allow me to introduce myself, I'm a man of wealth and taste," he echoes the sophisticated, aristocratic Lucifer that now dominates popular culture. Visual arts have similarly transformed Lucifer from medieval grotesque to romantic rebel. Contemporary artists often draw on Milton's complex Satan or Blake's revolutionary devil, rather than traditional demonic imagery. This aesthetic shift reflects changing moral sensibilities, our preference for complex anti-heroes over simplistic villains. For mature believers navigating this media landscape, these portrayals create opportunities for spiritual discernment. Rather than simply rejecting popular culture's Lucifer as blasphemous, they might ask what these reimaginings reveal about contemporary spiritual hunger. Jesus used cultural references and parables drawn from everyday life to communicate spiritual truth. Perhaps today's parables come through Netflix and popular music. The video game industry has similarly embraced morally complex Lucifer figures. Games like Diablo or Darksiders allow players to engage with fallen angel narratives interactively, making moral choices that explore the boundaries between rebellion and righteousness. This interactive engagement with theological concepts represents an entirely new mode of spiritual exploration. Social media has amplified these reimagined Lucifers, with quotes, memes, and fan communities developing around sympathetic devil portrayals. When a line from the Lucifer TV series goes viral, "I'm the devil," not a monster, it enters cultural consciousness far beyond the show's direct audience. What makes these popular portrayals significant isn't just their entertainment value, but how they reflect and shape contemporary spiritual questioning. When millions find themselves sympathizing with Lucifer, what does this reveal about our collective relationship with traditional religious frameworks? What if these popular reimaginings aren't simply secularizing sacred concepts, but translating them into forms accessible to contemporary spiritual seekers? What if they represent not the death of religious engagement, but its evolution into new cultural expressions. Lo Bashamayim, high it is not in heaven. This rabbinic principle suggests divine truth isn't remote, but accessible through human interpretation and engagement. Perhaps these popular Lucifer reimaginings, for all their commercial packaging, represent genuine attempts to wrestle with eternal questions in contemporary language. As we've explored how 21st century fiction has transformed Lucifer from one-dimensional villain to complex antihero, we must ultimately ask, what does this reimagining mean for our understanding of evil itself? Does humanizing the devil strengthen or weaken our moral frameworks? And what might these evolving narratives reveal about the future of religious and ethical thought? Traditional religious frameworks often presented evil as an external force embodied in Satan that tempts otherwise good humans towards sin. This externalization served important psychological and social functions, creating clear moral boundaries and externalizing humanity's darkest impulses. But as psychologist Carl Jung observed, what we don't acknowledge in ourselves doesn't disappear. It operates from the shadows of our unconscious. Modern Lucifer narratives often internalize what was previously externalized, suggesting evil emerges not from cosmic tempters, but from human choice. As James 1:14 acknowledges, each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and taste. This shift doesn't eliminate moral responsibility, but rather increases it by removing external scapegoats. Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, takes on new meaning when we recognize that the brokenness needing repair exists within us, not just in external forces. Perhaps these humanized Lucifer narratives actually strengthen moral agency by forcing us to confront our own capacity for both good and evil. The most thoughtful modern portrayals suggest evil isn't a substance, but a relation, not a thing in itself, but a distortion of good. When Lucifer in various narratives claims to have been created to rebel or describes his fall as misguided love rather than pure malice, these stories echo Augustine's ancient concept of evil as privation of good rather than independent force. For mature believers navigating an increasingly complex moral landscape, these evolving narratives offer important spiritual resources. They challenge simplistic moral frameworks while maintaining the reality of evil, not by externalizing it onto convenient theological figures, but by acknowledging its presence within human hearts and systems. The biblical narrative itself contains this evolution. Early Old Testament texts often attribute both good and evil to God directly. 1 Samuel 16:14 states, "Now the spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him." Later texts introduce Satan as an external tempter, while New Testament writings emphasize human moral agency, alongside cosmic forces. Perhaps our evolving Lucifer narratives continue this theological development, rather than simply rejecting it. What if these reimagined Lucifers aren't undermining moral clarity, but inviting more sophisticated moral engagement? What if they represent not the death of evil as a concept, but its maturation into something that accounts for human psychology systemic injustice, and moral complexity. The most profound question these narratives raise isn't whether Lucifer can be sympathetic, but whether our traditional understanding of good and evil has been too limited all along. As Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 13:1-21, "For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known." Perhaps these evolving narratives represent not moral confusion, but moral growth, an attempt to see beyond simplistic categories toward the fuller understanding Paul anticipated. Perhaps they invite us not to abandon the concept of evil, but to engage it with greater wisdom, compassion, and self-awareness. As we conclude this exploration, I invite you to consider, what if the true spiritual challenge of our age isn't defending traditional narratives against modern reinterpretations, but discerning what eternal truths might be speaking through these new cultural forms? What if God continues to reveal divine wisdom, not just through ancient texts, but through our evolving cultural engagement with them? Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel. Perhaps the first step in spiritual wisdom remains simply listening, not just to comfortable religious narratives, but to the challenging questions our culture raises through these reimagined Lucifers. For in wrestling with these questions, like Jacob with the angel, we too might receive unexpected blessings,